This computer. Wonderful. All right. Well, welcome to the Made for Greatness show and my guest, Mike Aquilina. Really excited to have you join me today, Mike.
Oh, thanks
And
for inviting me. This is an honor.
yeah, yeah, it was um particularly I'm excited to talk about your book on friendship and the fathers.
Hmm.
Um, it really grabbed me, the title, because friendship has been something that has resonated with me as one of the deep beauties of life. And becoming a better friend and
Hmm.
having good friends, admiring people's virtue of friendship that is not only molding of your own virtue. I think I don't remember who it was. It might have been Seneca. It said, "Spend time around those whose presence calls forth your best."
Mm.
Right. And that's what I feel is at the heart of friendship is we're really wanting the best for each other and we're
Hmm.
wanting a virtue and a good, and we genuinely seek that for each other. And so your title connected with evangelization
Yes,
and how the early church, it felt right, right? Like isn't that how what is the gospel but friendship with Christ? And how do we share and introduce people to this good news of God who became man, who wishes to enter into relationship with us?
that's right. And when you get that, you see what made that first evangelization of the world so effective. Sociologists tell us that the church grew for hundreds of years. Those first 300 years, the church
Hmm.
grew at a steady rate of 40% per decade worldwide. 40% per decade worldwide. And that happened, really when the church was illegal. When it was illegal, it was a capital crime to practice Christianity. So how did this happen?
Yes.
Well, it happened through the power of friendship. It didn't happen through any programs that came from a chancery anywhere. It didn't happen, by memorizing an elevator speech. There were no elevators. It didn't happen.
Right.
It didn't happen through any training session or that sort of thing. It happened through friendship. It was a natural means that had been elevated to the supernatural by Jesus Christ.
And before we dive into some of the book, I'm curious, you touch on how you got onto wanting to write this book. Could you share a little bit of the introduction of the book on what sparked the idea and then how you found out that this was actually something worth capturing, studying, and letting the church know
Mhm.
about this?
Well, I happened upon a longitudinal study that had been done by Duke University and the University of Arizona, I believe, and it studied uh, social isolation over decades in the United States
Hmm.
of America. And so it did this kind of in the positive way of studying friendship, right? Asking people how
Right.
many friends they had. And they would define friend as someone to whom you would confide your secrets, the
Yeah.
things that you didn't feel comfortable with, the things that you were uneasy about, your insecurities. And you could lay these bare, you could make yourself vulnerable. Uh, and so this went on over 25 years, this study. And over time, we see a gradual uh, lessening of the number of friends, right, that people have in the United States of America.
Right.
It just drops, and it drops somewhat precipitously, and we see a corresponding rise in reporting of loneliness, this feeling
Hmm.
that you're abandoned, that you're all alone, that you don't have anybody to talk to. So I know I look at this and I see it as a real epidemic. This is an epidemic of loneliness because
Right.
loneliness leads to all kinds of physical problems, physical illnesses. It leads to all kinds of mental illnesses, and
Right.
this becomes a social problem at a certain point.
Well, it was
And
even Adam's original problem is he was lonely.
yes, yes, right,
Right.
right, right,
Right.
right,
I mean,
right.
it's amazing, right?
Hmm. Yeah, so we're undoing what God had done, what he had fixed. So it isn't good for us to be
Be
alone.
alone,
It
right?
is not good for us to be alone. And yet we're finding ourselves increasingly alone. And I want to say that that longitudinal study was completed before the rise of social media, which has
Wow.
only intensified people's feeling of loneliness. You know, they have 4,000 Facebook friends, but they really don't feel like they have anyone they can talk to.
Right.
This is a strange phenomenon that correspondence between the rise of social media, the rise of smartphones, and the rise in anxiety and depression being treated today.
Right.
To me, this is astonishing.
Yeah, well, it is. And so you said you found that study,
Mhm.
and then where did that lead you?
Well, it led to a funny circumstance. I was
Okay.
giving a paper at the University of Notre Dame, and I talked about marriage in the ancient world, and I
Oh,
talked about the difference that Christianity made, the way it revolutionized the family from within.
hmm.
And as I was leaving, a scholar I know from Catholic University of America stopped me, and he just said, "You should write a study of the fathers in friendship." And I said to him, "I don't think there's enough material." And so I went back to my seat and I'm sitting there and I started just for fun to make a
Yeah.
list of the material that could be treated in a study on the fathers and friendship, right? And
Yeah.
the list was pretty long. And so that surprised me. And
Yeah.
when I got back to my hotel room that night, I looked on my hard drive at all the texts I have there, and I came up with more,
Yeah.
and then I just Googled around and I found even more. So it's a strange thing that just this convergence of these events. The fact that I read that longitudinal study on social isolation, and
Yeah.
that this scholar from Catholic U gave me a hard nudge to write a book like this. He didn't know about the study,
Right.
so I ended up writing the book, and there it is.
And I'm curious, there's always way more research than what gets in the book.
Mhm.
You have 14 stories,
Yeah.
I think. Is that correct in the book?
Well, I treat 14 fathers, so
Yes.
so there's sometimes multiple stories depending
Yeah.
on the
Okay. So
father.
there's 14 fathers.
Mhm.
How many did you have that you had to choose from?
I don't remember because this is quite a while ago now, but
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I did come up with a sizable list
I,
of
I
of
would imagine.
texts that could be treated in here, and some of these stories are phenomenal, like the story of the friendship of Basil and Gregory, which underwent some severe trials. Because of the eccentric personalities of both men, uh, and
Right.
uh, and then, there's the story of Augustine, who was a prodigy of friendship.
Yeah.
He misspent his teen years stealing pears with his friends. And then you look over the course of his life and all the changes that Augustine underwent, becoming Saint Augustine.
Right.
Think about this. Those friends who were with him stealing pears when he was a teenager remained with him. They followed him to the big city, Carthage, when he moved there. They
Mm.
followed him across the sea to Rome, and then they followed him to Milan, and then they followed him back to Africa. And some of them were ordained as he was ordained. Some of them
Wow.
became bishops as he became bishops, and they stayed with Augustine all through their long lives. That man was a prodigy of friendship, and I think we have a lot to learn from him. So there were these exceptional stories that really
Yeah,
really admit many stories within their story.
absolutely. And in the laying out of the picture that you give and the loneliness study, but then also you look at a study of you talk about the 40% rise in conversions for the first three
Mhm. Yeah.
centuries,
Hmm.
and then the deeper look into what fostered that.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because it was persecuted, but then it seemed the persecution, there was periods of active persecution, right? And then
Mhm,
it's
yeah.
on the books, but it's not applied because we kind of need the Christians.
Right,
We're in
right.
battle and in the doctors and they're good
Mhm.
lawyers, right? So they're become integral because they're spreading so much. You almost can't put them all in jail because we need them for the infrastructure.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
And because they were having children and the Romans were not having children. So
Wow.
so who's going to do the work in a place if nobody's having kids? You know, we're facing that problem again today. But in the ancient world, the society at large was dependent on Christians. Many Christians came from the upper classes, from the merchant classes, from the aristocracy, and even from the imperial family. What are you going to
Yeah.
do with all these people? So you do have the laws on the books. And what would happen is that whenever Christianity became a bother for one reason or another,
Right.
or whenever there was a social crisis and you needed a scapegoat, you'd initiate the persecution again, right? And you'd make
Right.
it that way. So the persecutions were intermittent, but they
Hmm.
became increasingly severe over time, so that by the middle
Right.
of the third century, we have the persecution of Decius, which is continued by Valerian, and there you
Hmm.
have to have that golden ticket in your pocket, or you could go to jail. You had to have a libellus showing that you had
Mm.
offered sacrifice to the
Wow.
pagan gods. So they were trying to root out the Christians by demanding the one thing that they knew a faithful Christian could not do.
And where do you see, because I see friendship as you share these stories from the fathers as an integral part and witness, right?
Mhm.
Because the Christians lived differently,
Yes, yes,
right?
yeah.
And you mentioned that in, well, there's sections if we look at the story of Meniscus Felix
Mm.
where they're having their debate, right? And they're talking about how the Christians, how the Romans rule, and who would harm a child,
Hmm. Yes.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And who deals with suffering
Hmm.
with joy, and who enjoys the simple pleasures,
Right,
right?
right.
And I think that's the beauty is the faith is not just something we think, but it changes the way we live.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does. And that's what made Christianity attractive to the others. The pagan neighbors didn't look at a Christian family and say, well, gee, I would like to be persecuted. I would like to, be in danger of losing my job and my property and my inheritance from my parents. And so I'm gonna
Right,
I'm gonna find something that brings all of these different hardships upon my life. Nobody wants that. But
right.
what happened was that they saw people living with this kind of danger, with this kind of threat hanging over their head, even if it wasn't a time of active persecution.
Yeah,
People spent their lives waiting for the other shoe to drop because they knew the history, the recent history. It was a fairly regular thing for this to just flare up again. So what they did was they looked at those families and they saw happy homes. They saw couples who are happy together. They saw couples who loved their children. They saw children who loved their parents. And they
right.
did not see this elsewhere. When you look at the
Mm,
record of Roman family life in the third century, in the second century, it was awful. Divorce was on the rise. Uh, uh, Family life was not especially happy. A man was usually around 30 when he married a girl of 11 or 12, and it was an arranged marriage. And you
wow.
can't imagine, because of that age difference, that it was an especially happy marriage, right? There's kind of a psychological disconnect there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and so what happened then? Well, most Romans had they wanted one son, right? They wanted one son because they wanted to spend as little money as possible and kind of maximize the money that stayed in the family. So they only
Wow.
want one heir, and it had better be a son because a girl would not do. So Romans practiced abortion, they practiced infanticide with some frequency. And
Wow.
this could happen many times over the course of a marriage until you got the heir you wanted, right? And then all children after that were superfluous. So children would often be drowned at birth, right
Wow.
there by the midwife, or taken out and exposed at the town dump, where the scavenging birds and dogs would come. Uh, abortion was common, infanticide was common. This does not make for a happy marriage. Adultery
Wow.
was common. They
Yeah.
you sometimes now when you're driving on through these towns, you see a sign in front of a private investigator's office. Suspicious? We'll find out for you, Uh,
Right.
that's the way life was in the Roman family. And there's plenty of complaint about this in the surviving records from the pagans. Um, but those people looked at their neighbors. They looked at the
Yeah.
people in the booth next to them in the forum, and they saw something that they would like to have for themselves. They saw happiness. They saw peace. They saw a goodness.
Mm.
They saw virtue. And so it made those Christians attractive, and it made people want to have friendship with them. And they did have friendship. Christians were singularly open to friendship, even philosophically. I talk about that in the book, that the pagan philosophers who spoke of friendship, most notably Cicero and
Yes.
Aristotle, both of whom wrote extensively about friendship,
Hmm.
did not believe that you could be friends with someone if you had even slight disagreements over political matters or religious matters.
Or
They did not
core
believe,
values,
or
right?
values, or even accidents of birth. They did not believe a poor man could be a friend with a
Oh,
rich man,
wow.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and that was not the case with Christians, right? Because they knew that God Himself had become human in order to
Mm.
befriend them. He said, "I call you friends," and He said this to a bunch of numbskulls, right? Who were
Well, God, the gap from God to man is about as big as you get, right?
That's right. That's right. So a Christian could not look at another human being and say, well, that's too wide a gap for me. Christians had to be open to friendship because God had been open to friendship with them, and had set the bar pretty high
Right.
for the pursuit of friendship. So I think friendship was the ordinary course of evangelization in the first century, second century, third century, and fourth century. People, the Christians were open to friendship with others, and so by the power of their witness, the witness of their lives, they converted those others who were their friends.
And you talk about this in your book, Mike, the virtue.
Mhm.
Like it's something we cultivate.
Yeah,
I don't know how many people feel like they're just not they don't have it,
yeah, yeah,
right? That
yeah.
I'm not the friend kind of guy,
Mm.
or I'm not that kind of person. Instead of thinking it's a virtue to be developed and cultivated,
Yes, yes.
right?
I think that you have to cultivate the habit of thinking about others, right? Thinking
Mm,
about them. Uh, uh, if somebody calls you with a prayer intention, say, or just with an ordinary concern, just says randomly, I'm concerned about this thing that's happening on Monday. Well, you call on Tuesday, right?
yeah.
You call on Tuesday to say, how did everything go? And you show that you're interested in their lives. Um, there's a
Mm,
great quote from a modern saint, Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, and it's out of 100 people, we are interested in 100. Out of 100 people, we're interested in 100. And
wow.
and you know what I've found by trying to live that line down the decades, I found that people are all interesting if you take the trouble to get to know them, right? Now, you might meet someone at first and you think, oh, he's not a good conversationalist. Wow, this guy's shallow, and it's just that you don't know him. You
Yeah.
don't know him. And so you have to spend more time. You have to draw him out a little bit. You have to show that you're there for him, that you're trustworthy, and then you get to know about his life. And it's interesting. People become interesting the more time you spend with them. I've never known anyone to become less interesting the more time I spent with them.
Right. Well, and I feel like I particularly remember feeling a change in my heart when I would was leaning and developing mental prayer and just spending time with Christ in
Mhm.
conversational intimacy. And one of the things I that I he gave me is I wanted others to fall in love with him too, because the intimacy and
Yeah.
the joy and the peace you experience. And I started praying, Lord, give me a love for souls.
Mhm.
And when I think the difference was not just people as obstacles in your way to deal with and annoy basically was it somebody said hell is other people. I don't remember who said that.
Yeah, I think that was Sartre. Yeah, right? No, no, was that was that Milton? That might have
It
been
might
Milton.
have been Milton, but
Yeah,
it's so funny, right?
yeah,
Because we have this idea when we don't care
mm,
about people, they are hell to
yeah,
us, right? When we
yes,
actually don't see them as someone with their their dignity, that God created them, that God loves them, that God's drawing them, and that inside their heart is a hunger that is restless and struggles that are real
mhm.
and challenges that they are shouldering despite what they're doing right now,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
And the reverence that we get when we actually start to realize that there is a what did C.S. Lewis say? We have never met a mere mortal,
yeah, yeah.
right?
That's right. That's right.
And that's that when you believe that this is an
Yeah,
eternal soul that
yeah,
longs to love as God is calling it into that, it
yeah.
just
So the friendship with Jesus has priority. And
yeah.
that loops back to what you were saying before. I think it was Milton who said, hell is oneself. And then
Okay.
I think it's Sartre who said hell is other people. And I would
Okay.
say that you can't appreciate yourself. You can't love yourself or love other people
Yeah.
unless you first have that love relationship with God. What you
Yeah.
need to do is to find his image in yourself. You need to find his image in other people, right? You find
Yeah.
that image in other people and you learn why they're precious to God. He finds them interesting. He found them interesting enough to die for them, right? So if you can tune into that wavelength,
He's crazy in love with this person that I
yes,
don't even know,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So then
right?
you have the basis of a friendship. But again, you have to build to that. You have to build to it first in your own personal prayer. You've got to
Yeah.
pray about having friends. You've got to pray about the friends you seem to be gaining. So friendship is a process.
Yes.
I remember someone telling me about a friend of theirs who wanted to have more friends, but kind of gave up on it. If as he put it, as if there was no marriage proposal within an hour. Or you've got to give these things time, and some people just don't reveal themselves that easily. So you might have to give it a lot of time. But if
Right.
people are open to your companionship, it can be good to spend the time, get to know them, find out why God loves them so much,
Yeah.
why God made them the way they are. And you'll find them interesting. Out of 100 people, we are interested in 100.
And curious from your personal experience, Mike, a mutual friend of ours,
Mhm.
when speaking of you, said you have the gift of friendship, and you're particularly have that virtue. And is it something that's always just been on your heart that you've really been drawn to be interested and care deeply
Mhm.
about other people?
I think that like a lot of things, it's something that you can pick up from your parents, and it is something that I saw in my parents
Hmm.
that they that they still had the friends that they had in grade school, right?
Wow.
They were still in touch with these people. They were still on very good terms with them. They had very deep conversations with these people, but they had a lot more friends too, that you don't have to get rid of the old ones when you make new friends. You can introduce them to each other. You can cultivate a friendship between friends, right? Who don't know each
Right.
other, who haven't been exposed to each other. So I saw that in the lives of my parents. They had this attitude of service that was that was pretty amazing. We're still finding out all these stories now. We were a pretty poor family. My
Yeah.
father worked for a mining company. He was a welder, and he didn't make a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
And there were seven of us kids, and we lived in a little tiny apartment. The boys shared one bed, and the girls shared another bed. So there wasn't a lot of money or anything like that, but none of us knew we were poor.
Wow.
What we are still finding out now in late adulthood, I'm in my 60s, and I meet people who tell me that my mother was feeding their family from our table for years. These were families that had been abandoned by
Wow.
by a dad, or that never had a dad, or
Mm.
families that were in dire circumstances. Uh, we didn't think that we had a whole lot of food on the table, and yet my
Right.
mother, it seems, was feeding the neighborhood from our kitchen, and the little bit that we had. And so I think that you pick up certain habits. I don't feel that I'm as good at it as my parents were, um,
Wow.
because it was their whole life, and you spend your life trying to live up to that.
Well, that's beautiful. Um, because having models of virtue, peace, joy, like people that pursue Christ and can talk and then live that level of friendship. And I personally, sometimes I find it an uncomfortable level of caring about people.
Yeah,
That's what it feels like to me
yeah, yeah,
sometimes,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it makes me uncomfortable
yeah,
because doesn't seem normal to me to think
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it's so good
yeah.
to stretch us.
You keep referring to friendship as a virtue, and that's an important way of thinking about it. A virtue is a habitual disposition to the good, right? So it's habitual. You gotta make it a habit. You gotta
Yeah.
exercise that muscle, right?
Mm.
Or it's not going to feel natural. I think about all of the sports I'm bad at. Why? Because I never exercise those muscles, right? I'm gonna be
Right.
bad at them, of course. Um,
Yeah.
so, my mother just exercised it constantly, it seemed, and so did my father, in his quiet way. And I think they did set models for us and set examples
Right.
that we can still strive to follow. And it's funny, you start with the natural, and grace builds on nature.
Hmm.
My mother fed people. My mother listened to people. I can remember being a little kid, and these people would come to visit, and they'd talk to my mother for hours
Wow.
because she would listen and she would respond. She
Wow.
was there for them, and they knew it. And she would give everyone a rosary. That was her thing. The rosary was her thing. She was big on Fatima. She was big on the Blessed Mother.
Yeah.
She'd give them a rosary. She didn't care whether they were Catholic or not. She would give them a
Hmm.
rosary. And
Right.
because it was this woman who had been feeding them, who had been listening to them when nobody else had, they would take it gratefully. They didn't resent it. They were grateful for it. They
Wow.
didn't think of it as an insult because they're not Catholic. This was something that Mary gave me. My mom's Mary. This is something that Mary gave me.
Yeah.
So it's something I want, because I want to be like Mary. I want to be someone who listens. I treasure the fact that she listens to me.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing
Hmm.
that hidden aspect that's not in the book that's impacted you so much. Right?
It's the background of the book, really.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I'm talking about the fathers of the church, and this is in my life. I'm talking about my father, my mother,
Yeah.
my own ancestors, and in Greek it's all the same, right, Patres?
Right. Now, curious, it at least to me, it seems like in our modern age, and you mentioned this at the end, our 21st century problem,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Society is very different. Families really tend to disperse and not actually, I mean, you might not, some people nowadays might not stay in touch with their siblings much,
Yeah.
let alone have a lot of friends that are virtuous, but more. friendship of utility because of something. And then there's this rise of, let's let's do sports and do things, but let's not talk about religion or politics kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Keep your controversial stuff under, and
Yeah.
and also your weaknesses.
Yes.
Right?
And then you don't have friendship.
Well, you don't have vulnerability and there's
That's
no
right.
safety. And
That's
it's
right.
really, I think a lot of men struggle with not having real friendships where there has to be posturing and not much true. What are you wrestling with?
Mhm.
Morally, understanding of wrestling with your own faith and reconciling how difficult life is, and how how does suffering work in reality when I'm walking with some people through stage 4 cancer and young
Mhm.
couples, and it's very real for some people.
It is. It is. I find that for men, it's very helpful to find things to collaborate on. You sit down and you do a work together, or you stand up and do a work together, whether it's taking down trees or
Yeah,
making a trail someplace or whatever. You do some work together. You tend to talk while you work. You tend to talk during your breaks. You tend to talk on the ride out there. You tend to talk on the ride home. But
mm,
men get a certain satisfaction out of finishing a job together, and it becomes a
right,
bond for them. It really
right,
does. And I have to say, in my own life, a lot of my closest friendships have come uh, out of this kind of collaboration, working
right,
together with another guy on a project. Whether it's a book or music or whatever, you finish the project and you have a certain bond because of the product. You
right,
you, you feel that this has a value that you and I share. This is something important to us, not just to me. This is something that you understand. You get it, right? We
right,
made this
exactly,
together. So that can be a great thing, and we can do that in so many ways. It's not just through books and that sort of thing. It can be through manual labor as well.
I am curious, what are your thoughts, Mike, on what brought about, because it seems the most natural thing that it should be shared through friendship.
Hmm.
And then we did have the rise of all these programs
Yeah.
that are feel more organized, artificial. You become a project for them, not a friend.
Right, right, right.
What do you think happened?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we became more and more isolated in the way we live. Think about what it was like to be just an ordinary guy, an ordinary fellow in the second century
Hmm.
AD, right? Um, there were no news media. You know how you got news? You got news by getting out of your house. You
Right.
went down and you went to the market, or you went to the well, or you went to
Hmm.
some common place where there were other people, and you sat there talking about what was new in your town. And sometimes there would be somebody from out of town who would tell you something about his city, right?
Right.
And so you expand your horizons that way by listening to other people. That was life. That's how you grew. That's how you got more knowledge, was by exposure to others that was direct. It wasn't
Right.
mediated by a screen. It wasn't mediated by
The phone.
paper or phone or anything. It was direct. And so that's how cities grew. That's how Christianity grew. That's how churches grew,
Yeah.
because of this contact of people, with people. So we don't live that way anymore.
Hmm.
I talked to a pastor who told me that the big problem he has in trying to build a community is that his parishioners, the people in his pews, don't know the folks who live next door on the left, or the folks who live next door on the right. They don't know the people who live behind them. They don't know the people who live across the street. They, their garage door goes up in the morning and they
Right.
decide somewhere else to go to work.
Yeah.
Then they come home at night, the garage door goes up and it closes behind them. And on weekends, they go somewhere else to do something social.
Right.
So it's kind of a strange situation we find ourselves in today where we don't have direct unmediated contact with others very often. We live a lot of our lives just exposing ourselves to screens, to
Right.
television, to what's on YouTube or what's on Netflix.
Hmm.
This is our contact that's human, but it's pseudo-human. It's not real in any sense. So
Right.
I think my pastor friend who was worried about then how do you build a community out of that, right?
Right.
Because he's remembering a time when we were growing up where everybody went to the same school, all the
Hmm.
boys played on the same little league team, and
Right.
there were common activities that people had,
Exactly.
and we don't do things that way anymore. So now we really do have to make an effort to have community. And going back to what I said before, building community among men based on work can be
Yeah.
very effective. So a pastor who needs something done that requires work will often get volunteers.
Right.
Men will come forward if you give them something to do. And if you make some kind of formation part of that,
Uh-huh.
eventually, you
Right.
can get away with it because you're not asking them to come to a class or listen to a talk or do something that, is spiritual. You're asking them to do
Exactly.
some work, and they know they have arms, they know they can lift things, and doing those things together builds friendship, and it also builds a certain bond with the parish community.
I love that. And the projects and really um trying to lean into it. I mean, I think what you said, this beautiful thing, you mentioned it at the beginning of your book, you mentioned it again at the end of your book, and that here's the exact words you said, that there's one thing all the fathers agree on. It's that friendship is a virtue, and like the other virtues, it needs work.
Mhm,
And it isn't just a nice thing that falls into your lap. If you want friends, you must put in the effort of being a friend.
mhm. Yes, yes.
And 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 I think at the beginning you said you can't you added laziness in here somewhere. And you said that um we can't be lazy and expect to have friends.
Yeah, yes, yeah. You do have to put effort into it, and really, there's a certain moral obligation I think we have today to put that effort into it because I think of some friends I have who are very elderly,
Mm,
and they have difficulty now making new
right.
friends because their hearing is diminished. They can't get out as much as they used to. So they have all these limitations, and it just seems so hard to them to make friends. So we got to reach out to these people because they're living very lonely lives. I know a man who takes every call from every telemarketer just so he can have some human
Someone to talk
connection
to.
during the day, right? Right. Keep a telemarketer on the phone. You're not doing that telemarketer any favors by doing that. But this is why so many people are vulnerable, to
Right.
scammers and that sort of thing because they're lonely. Loneliness leads to so many bad situations with personal health and also, with personal vulnerabilities. So, we've got to be there for other people. We've got to make the effort to befriend them, to be their friends, and genuinely to love them. This is what Jesus did for us, even though we were tiresome, and even though,
Right.
we didn't treat him right. This is what Jesus did for us. He did it for the apostles, and he called them friends on that night, knowing that they were about to abandon him and even betray him. So we've got to get into it, and we've got to stick with it. We want to be like Christ. We want him to live in us. Well, for those things to be true, we've got to be friends. We've got to be friends to others.
And I think it's to the level that your book inspires to me is the friendship and how much the fathers really paint the picture of the beauty, right?
Hmm.
And the robust joys and the sorrows that come
Yeah.
from friendship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the neat thing is have it as a real thing. I want to be a great friend.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
want to be in asking that question, am I being a friend? How can I be a friend today? Who am
Yeah.
I reaching out to? One of my habits that I've developed over time is I go in my phone and I'll text someone, people that I'm driving or in my prayer that morning, you are on my mind. How can I be praying for you this week?
Hmm. Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And we're calling them and I'd say I have a few minutes, I'm on a drive. You are wondering how are things going? Like develop and do that.
Yeah.
And
Make it a
at
habit.
first, yeah, be the proactive friend that reaches out and gives you the time of day
Yeah.
because you care
Hmm.
and you out of friendship.
Yeah.
Um, and what I love doing is how do you know if you're your actual friend? Call someone when you don't need anything and just to see how they're doing.
Yes.
Just to
Yes.
see how they're doing. And
Yeah.
don't ask it for anything. And
Yeah.
that's the joy of it.
Yeah.
I just, how's it going?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of St. Augustine. He really is a great model in all of this. And his confessions are really just the story of many friendships, many
Yes.
friendships. Sometimes he doesn't even give you the names of these friends. Like he talks about one friend whose death crippled him. This
Wow.
Augustine was just laid low by this man's passing, and it was an important point in his growth. Uh,
Right.
that's part of the story, his interactions with those hoodlums, that he was hanging around with when he was teens. That's part of the story. The
Right.
his conversations with the friends who lived with him near Milan. That's an important part of the story. All of Augustine's life was an interaction with God. That's clear from the Confessions because that book is addressed to God Almighty. He doesn't address it to you, dear reader. He
Right.
addresses it to God, right? But it's a
Right.
story of his conversations with other humans. Friendship was at the center of his life, even though, Augustine was really a model of Christian life. He lived from his friendships, and he lived them in the sight of God. He lived them with the power of God, and really, that's what he wants to teach us how to do by writing that book, The Confessions.
Right. No, and it's that's such a great book to to read and dive into as well, just to see the arc. And you mentioned it in the beginning of the power of friendship with the Augustine, where he stole the fruit from the tree, and he didn't want the fruit.
Yeah,
He didn't, and he said, "I did it to be one of them
yeah,
because I wanted belonging,
yeah.
not the thing. I didn't want to steal. I didn't think it
Right.
was right, but I wanted to be with my friends."
That's right. So company, even in rebellion, a rebellion against God in this case, because
Right,
because you're stealing. It's not only the neighbor you're offending God. So Augustine does show the dynamic, that's something he's very frank about. He even talks about the dangers that come with friendship,
right,
mutual exploitation and that kind of thing, using another person. Uh, all of these things come up in his various writings. He was someone who was very sensitive to the realities of friendship, but more more so to the joys of friendship. And that's what he puts out there
yeah.
in the story of his life.
Well, thank you so much for writing this book, Mike. And I just want to encourage everyone watching. I really encourage you to read it and at least read the first couple few. You will be inspired, enriched, and just refreshed with the the friendship that they have and the beauty that it brings,
Mhm.
and to inspire to live it and to develop this intentional friendship in our life, not only to evangelize those in our lives that are friends, but I even think living the Christian life, we need Sams in our life. We need to journey with people who can be true friends.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Frodo and Sam, right? We need friends in the Christian life, right? He sent them out two by two, right? Even to live the Christian life, we need friendship. And to share it, we need to care
Yeah.
and to have that friendship. So this is a beautiful launching pad for just reviving us to re re-engage with this call to friendship, and first friendship with Christ and then those around us.
Yes,
So
I
thank you
agree.
so much, Mike.
Thanks again for having me
Been a
on.
joy.
It's an honor.
All right. God bless.